Well, hello.
Good
So,
evening.
yes. So thank you everyone for joining tonight on Children's Health Defense Canada for our new series of Taking Back Birth. Tonight I am very honored to have on Billie Harrigan, who is my mentor and friend and just a warrior in the work she's been doing for over 40 years. The only one talking about birth trauma with her, was it I was going to say accredited. I don't know if you still call it that. The only accredited program of Birth Trauma Ontario. We're going to get into all of that. And yeah, I don't know. I'm just so excited to have you here and where this conversation is going to go. I just feel like I know we have no problem talking to each other about all these things. So we'll see where the conversation is going to go tonight. But thank you so much for joining us. I know so many people are excited to have you on here and hear this conversation.
Well, thank you for having me. We're going to have some fun.
Yes. And so there's so many things to talk about. And I was thinking, I wrote down one question because I thought it was important. And I think I'll, before we go off and who knows what tangents, I'm going to start with this question that I had in mind from several days ago, from last week even. So I thought, we're on Children's Health Defense Canada, this platform. It's known, obviously, for fighting for our children, protecting our children, immunization information, and all of these amazing things to inform parents. And I remember in a conversation we had, you had mentioned that birth is the last to go. And so there's lots of other organizations, talking about food, immunizations, and health. And I know there's a very niche group in the birth world that's talking about the things that you do. But why do you think there's not like the same amount or passion around birth as there is in, say, in like, children's health with immunizations and nutrition and all these other things at this moment?
I would say it has to do with about 400 years, 500 years of the most epic programming that has unfolded in the history of mankind. In the during the time of the witch hunts and the witch burnings, the primary person to go at the stake was the midwife. The midwife was the healer, the village wise woman. She understood herbs, she understood prayer, she understood incantations. That was part of her practice. And she became the most dangerous person to the rising male medical model. What was then called the male midwife, it then became the obstetrician. And she was the one that disrupted the flow of power by connecting with families and by helping families. She was in their lives from birth to death. She helped them in all of the ways, and it took business and power away from the rising academics, the rising medical profession. They were burned. There was none left, and then they came after the god siblings. The god siblings were what were called the gossips. The gossips were the women who came to the birth. And there was the midwife who knew a few things. And there was the gossips who came. Those were the sisters, the aunties, the nanas, the girlfriends. And they helped the mother through her time of labor and birth. And afterwards, no men were allowed. This was a strictly female event. The men were kicked out. And afterwards, there was merriment and beer, wine, spirits. And at the time of the witch burnings, it was understood that if you left a woman unsupervised by a man, then it meant incantation and witchcraft. So they came after the women, burned the midwives, got rid of the gossips, and the women had nobody to care for them. And the male midwife said, "We'll do it." But that was not profitable. So the lying-in hospitals were set up for the women to go to them. And that's where the death rate went to the exorbitant, over-the-top that we associate with childbirth, that women die in childbirth. Well, they don't. But if you put a male midwife who does an autopsy on a cadaver who died of sepsis with staph or strep or some of the other pretty virulent bacteria, and then went to the laboring woman and stuck his dirty, filthy fingers up her, she's going to die. Midwives didn't do that. The vagina was a place for a baby to come out of, not for dirty hands to go up. So we have this history of if women support women, it's a very dangerous thing. And it's I believe it's burned into our mitochondrial DNA. We get our mitochondrial DNA from our mothers and their mothers and their mothers before them. And it's burned into our mitochondrial DNA and it's burned into our cellular memory. We know what happens when we are women. We know how dangerous that is. And so it's in our bones. And then through clever marketing, it was considered really gross and offensive for a male midwife to be at a birth. It's like, what is wrong with you, you disgusting pervert? So they found a way of getting over that by medicalizing and making birth very scientific. They found cadavers, they cut them open, they drew pictures, they had women on their backs, and they poked up their hoo-ha and they measured things, and it was oh so scientific. And so therefore it was not disgusting and gross. It was very, very scientific. And for the most part, if they weren't sticking their fingers up there and killing the women, birth was pretty simple. That's not the narrative we know. We are taught a different narrative, and that comes through the marketing of the medical industry. And we believe that birth is so dangerous until we ended up in hospitals. Hospitals increase the birth rate, death rate by about fourfold. But that's not part of the story, we believe. And the scientific method of measuring, poking, prodding became the preferred method because through this, again, very clever marketing, we learned that women are stupid. Their ovaries make them prone to flakiness and unable to make good decisions. So the last thing we want is a woman supervising a birth because, golly gee, that silly little woman would just get so stupid. So we need men to take over. And men wrote things down, and we have the obstetrical model. But it's in our collective memory that being a woman with a woman without this oversight of an authoritative male. Now, of course, most obstetricians are women now, and midwives are women, but the industry itself still maintains this very masculine male entity of incredible narcissism and what they consider authoritative knowledge. Trust us, we know, little girl. And so that's so deeply embedded in us and so deeply programmed in us that if we stepped outside of that, and when something is this embedded and there are rituals, sacraments, it's very dangerous to step outside of it. We're talking about a cult. These are definitions of a cult. So the industry itself operates like a cult. It is a belief system. And this belief system is these silly little girls better get their little tushies in and be supervised by daddy, who could be a male or a female, and supervise and tell them what to do, and you will be safe. You will be very safe. Because if you don't do this, you're going to get a dead baby. So this is embedded in us. And as our culture, or throughout any of our life journeys, separates from other entrenched systems, like education, we don't believe that if we separate from the educational system, our babies are going to die. We are not programmed for that. We don't believe that if we separate from perhaps a religious organization, well, we might, but generally we don't think our babies are going to die. But if we separate from this one, we've been told over and over and over, your baby's going to die. It's not true. It's just a belief system. So it's usually the last to go because nobody wants a dead baby.
Mm-hmm. And no, and that's the fear that they push on us in that narrative, right? To kind of like guilt us and keep us in this corrupted system that has no evidence behind their practices. And it is interesting, like thinking of my own journey, and immunizations now is even, a topic that's easier to digest and talk about, but that has to do with like the health of our children. And, they say like, if you don't get these shots at your well baby clinics, when, your baby's born, there's going to be harms and risks, but we're still more adamant to say no to those. And I don't know if it's because like baby is now born and on the outside. But I would say, even just from my own experience, I was like convicted, like no more, no vitamin K at birth, nothing. We're not doing immunizations, but still prior to that, I did the whole hospital birth. So why is the fear different? Why is it easier to accept even the immunizations and knowing that, no, my baby's not going to die if I say no to these versus no to the hospital and the systems?
Probably because there's no history of being burned at the stake for saying no. That's embedded into our DNA. And the ambient violence, the ambient abuse, meaning this kind of systematic environment of abuse and fear, that, and it has to do with cult programming, that if you do leave the technocratic medicalized birth services industry, that the technocratic gods will hunt you down and bad things will happen to you. It's been a very effective cult. Um, and they do have many ways of still enforcing that. I've never, I've only done some research on cults, and it is very, very difficult to leave a cult. Very difficult. They make it difficult, and there is a great deal of threats and fears and reprisals if you do. And this particular industry also operates on those principles. When families leave these technocratic services, and they do offer medical services, that's why they exist. They exist to provide medical services for medical situations, and they're perfectly capable of doing that. It's just that they inflict all of this ambient abuse on top of it, which is nonsense. So if somebody has left the technocratic model and then they encounter a medical situation that is best handled by medical people in a medical facility, that's why they exist, they are met with a great deal of abuse. And some of that abuse also, if the baby isn't born yet, it's, dead baby, dead baby, dead baby, dead baby, dead baby, the usual. But if the baby's already born, they can't threaten the dead baby. So the new strategy, and they have escalated their terror tactics recently. I mean, terror tactics have always been part of this industry. It's well documented. The more recent terror tactics is sicking family services on the families. Family services are called. There usually have to be some exaggeration of imminent injury in order to get family services involved. But the mandate of family services is to respond to every call, whether it's bogus or not. And there's a good reason for that, to do that. But once they show up, they're being used as the barking lapdog for this industry. So families have not complied with everything. They come in for a medical situation to be handled by medical people in a medical facility, and that is a service that they are supposed to provide. But wait, what? You didn't have an ultrasound? You didn't do this? And then they call in family services, who comes in like the barking lapdog, and they show up. Where's your ultrasound? It's a terror tactic. Terror tactics is to make an example of one person to terrorize a community. And they're using it more and more. So that families are saying, if I don't engage and I don't accept this military grade surveillance of my fetus, and I don't accept all of these swabs, injections, whatever, then there is a potential that this secondary industry will come along and terrorize my family. Which is
happening. I know you are, very connected, and people come to you for help and getting these calls. People have been coming to me about what to do with CS involvement. So it is definitely ramping up, and definitely used to threaten and keep people in line in this system, right? And I think my last kind of like follow-up question just to this train of thought is, being on Children's Health Defence Canada, so we know why not a lot of people are talking about birth, why birth is the last to go with, 400 years of indoctrination. Immunizations are fairly new in comparison. So this is like you said, in our DNA and passed down generationally. So why is it like so important now? And I know you've been, dedicated 40 years of your life to this work, and I'm very new in it, and very passionate about getting this information out there. And so why is it so important that we have these conversations and change how children are being brought into the world, how babies, are being brought into the world? Why? Yeah.
A baby's entry into the world is their first rite of passage. And under these services, it's usually a fairly violent passage into the world. It's like, welcome to the world, kid. Life is tough. They are more often than not, over 50%, are ejected from their mother's wombs prior to being ready. So these are the rampant inductions. Inductions prior to COVID might have been 30, 40%. They are well over 50% now, including the idiotic membrane stripping, stretch and sweep, which my personal thoughts are it should be banned off the face of the earth. But it's one of the rites of passage, that women have to go through the stations of the cross, and that's to get the sacraments. And that's one of them. Somebody with a gloved finger has to go up your hoo-ha and have your cervix violated. These babies are being ejected too soon. In utero, they are being subjected to military-grade surveillance. The ultrasound is a war technology, and it was used extensively in World War II, very effectively, to find underwater submarines. The obstetrical industry went, well, babies are underwater. We like to look at them, and use this military-grade surveillance on them. Prior to that, they were using X-rays. They discovered fairly quickly that X-rays were very dangerous, very injurious to the baby, and developing fetus, as well as the mother. But they didn't give it up because they felt it was irresponsible of them not to look at a baby in utero for whatever reason. So that was not abandoned until this second military-grade surveillance came along. And it does fit today with a bigger picture of surveillance. It has become absolutely crucial in a woman's pregnancy journey that she submits to surveillance of her fetus. And that is priming the baby for surveillance. And so the baby is subjected to that. Ultrasound is not benign. It is the best technology we have for detecting an issue when there is one, but it is not a useful technology for just surveillance. And people, you're going to get lots of messages because I said that out loud. People disagree with that, but it's kind of research. There is that, one per several 100,000 where a fetus undergoes fetal surgery, and it is beneficial, but that's a very big discussion that we won't have time for. Mm-hmm. So babies are subjected to, this is not benign. The injections pushed on mothers are benign. Inductions are not benign. Medications given to the mother in labor are not benign. Don't eat sushi, but we're going to put fentanyl in your epidural. So sushi bad.
Yeah,
fentanyl.
Or get your flu shot. Get your DTaP now. That's never been tested on pregnant women. But yeah, stay away from your runny eggs and sushi and soft cheeses. Yeah.
Yes. Or that other injection that causes stillbirth, the thing we can't talk about that doesn't actually exist. So I think it's actually global warming or something. So these babies are subjected to fairly risky procedures in utero to let them know. And it is kind of a survival of the fittest. If these babies make it through that, then they get to live on the outside. So much of this surveillance that happens to babies prior to that is for the purpose of termination. So this industry is very focused on terminating babies. And then once it gets past a certain point and the mother's like, well, I'm not going to terminate the baby. Well, then it's like, well, then we better rescue that baby from your body, because the most dangerous thing to the baby is you. And we're going to monitor you for every little variation until we can swoop in and get that baby out of you. And that swooping in is a violent act against this poor little person who's coming into the world for the very first time. And once they arrive, the first thing to the baby, after they've been most often ejected from their mothers under heavy medication and extracted in whatever method. In some places, the extraction is over 50% through surgery. Not benign. Sometimes life-saving. I'm not going to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Sometimes life-saving. And then the first thing to do is to dry and stimulate. And I have had many obstetrical nurses contact me because of the violence done to the babies at birth. The scrubbing of the baby to get the vernix off, it creates micro abrasions, and the baby is sometimes bleeding afterwards.
Yes, I've witnessed that.
But by golly, we got the kid screaming.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's like, welcome to the world, kid. I'm going to rub you until you're bleeding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like trying to stimulate the feet and being so sensitive and new that skin has healed off that initial layer, and it's quite rough.
And what it does is it in doing this ritualized abuse, it for the sake of the baby, the mother is conditioned to say, if I subject myself to this, if I subject myself to the baby to this, then my baby will be safe. Oh, well, it's all about that safe. Then we're all going to live and the baby will be safe. And that creates a very damaging break in the bond between the mother and the baby. The rates of postpartum PTSD are through the roof, and it creates a break. And if you break the mother's bond to her baby, well, that baby is pretty much available to anything after that.
Mm-hmm. The going back, I'm trying to make little notes so to make sure we kind of come back to the important pieces, I think. And in the ultrasound right now, I think is a very important one, because we're in this culture now where we want information fast and we want quick access to this information. And I remember when my oldest had a little bit of experience at Waldorf and JK. He was there for 6 months before things, shut down, and he didn't return. But I remember one of the things they taught was like delayed gratification, and how important that was, like that waiting, that anticipation and in excitement. And I feel like as a culture and society, we have absolutely lost that delayed gratification, and that skill of being able to wait and be patient. So throughout this pregnancy, I have not had a single ultrasound. Both my boys, even, I did have, the dating and whatever, the anatomy, the things that you're told to do before I was aware. But I never wanted to find out the sex. I just thought, that's a beautiful surprise. And either way, I'm going to love this baby and healthy. And I just think, that's like probably the most ultimate surprise that we can, experience. And, talking to so many people, they're like, well, I just had to know. I had to know. I had to be prepared, and I had to know what was going on. What name, or, what colors, or what to paint, or how to tell their siblings. And so ultrasounds become so common in that sense, in the knowing, the need to know, without knowing the risks. And I wonder if more people knew the risks of ultrasound, if they knew that it was not benign and what was happening. I wonder if we would work on that, delayed gratification, or what is that about society that, we just need to know, and we do put our babies in harm without realizing it, right?
When I was expecting my first ultrasound as a routine, was just kind of coming in across the board. My older sisters had never had ultrasound, and then I was with an obstetrician. It's like, well, you have an ultrasound. It never felt right. And as a matter of fact, it did damage my daughter's optic nerve. So it was highly detrimental to her. And it was a permanent injury. But it didn't feel right. It felt very like invasive, wrong. Just now you're going to see these gray, shadowy images, and then you're supposed to see that your baby's fine because a gray, shadowy image showed up. It felt very violating. It felt intrusive. It was gross. And the women I talked to that submitted to that at the time, because it was new, didn't like it. And I believe that one of the ways that the industry got around that was like, oh, but you get to find out if it's a boy or girl. And now you get to have a reveal party. And now it's meant to be part of the excitement. And the research itself has shown that women never really liked having it done, that this was not an experience they enjoyed, until it got reframed and remarketed as your first peek at your baby and their first chance to find out if it's a boy or girl. And now you get to pick out the clothes. And it was rebranded as a super fun, exciting thing to do. And it worked. It worked. And it has now escalated to reveal parties and more of the big excitement. I think this culture doesn't understand when somebody doesn't want to have an ultrasound, because it has become so pervasive, this marketing, that it's such a super fun thing to do, and then boy or girl, and you get to see your baby. What if you don't see your baby? Do you have a dead baby? No, you don't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In not having any this time around, I have like really enjoyed the just like leaving this being and growing, and really kind of having to come internal and to connect and feel and notice all the different things, versus going for, again, external reassurance. It's very different now, because now you're relying on yourself. And that's, I think, through that, you said, like the surveillance of it, it's military grade, and it's another act where we, go outside of ourselves and we look for the external experts to reassure us that everything's okay, that external validation that we need in society so much on every level of our lives now. We need external validation in every area of how we spend our lives in day to day. And having that taken away and just being internal with it has been a huge shift. And I remember when one of our first conversations, when I'm still like unpacking, NICU things and things I had seen in the unit. One case was, and I'm forgetting the terminology right now, but aortic valve was misplaced in the wrong anatomy. So heart was pumping backwards, not working properly. And so they found that in ultrasound. They were able to set up, cardiologists like right at birth, then transport to sick kids and get this surgery underway. And, we had this baby in the unit, we had everything prepared. We were able to, get the equipment and everything was all good. And so my question was like, well, what about these things? Are we missing important things now that we have this intervention? Or would we miss things that would cause harm if we saw this early on? And you had a very interesting story for me that you had this case happen at home.
I did.
Or with a client. I don't know if you're able to share. Sorry, I kind of just.
Yeah, well, I did, and baby's fine. And it followed that family's experience, followed what was discovered in some Scandinavian research. So there, I won't be able to quote the author right now, but there was a Scandinavian research that had to do with major anomalies in the fetus that would require a surgical resolution after birth. Major anomalies. So they compared two groups. One, the major anomaly was detected through ultrasound, and the other was not detected. Either not detected because the mothers declined ultrasound, or the ultrasound just technician didn't pick it up, because they pick up between 17 and 79% of major anomalies. It's not that accurate. So this was comparing the two. Of the two groups, the non-detected went to full term because that was the way then. And their C-section rate was whatever it was culturally at the time that the study was done. It was under 20%. Of those where the anomaly was detected, all the babies were born prematurely because they were taken 100% by C-section. So both babies came out 100% C-section, the other just whatever was cultural for the time, under 20% C-section rate, and full term. Those that were detected got surgery within about 4 hours because it was set up. Those undetected got surgery within about, I believe it was 12 to 17 hours. The outcomes were detected ones had a much higher death rate because they were preterm, they were born by C-section, and they spent much longer in the NICU. Those that were undetected got surgery anyway, and more of those babies survived because they were full term, and more of them were born vaginally. So as it turned out, there was no benefit. There was no benefit to the detection.
Mm-hmm. And then also the amount of stress that was put on mom parents and mom carrying baby, and what that did, I think too. Yeah, of course. I think so much. And then we've seen it, right? Like I've seen it in ultrasounds, this baby has trisomy 17. We need to talk about, abortion. But baby actually is perfect after following, doing more testing, or, but that stress and that fear. I remember Logan, he had an echocardiogenic like mark on his heart. And it's like, okay, we need to do follow-ups for this and see. And it was just artifact that happens. And I think there's like so many things that ultrasounds pick up on that creates this fear and worry and concern that is completely unnecessary to have to go through during pregnancy as well. And I know I just don't want to miss this question, because I know this comes up a lot for you as well. I see in the comments here, it's like, well, what about placenta location? Because there's like a complete previa. And you have a very simple answer for that as well, though, placenta.
Using a fetoscope, if the placenta is on the anterior wall, that's the wall, the part of the uterus that is facing the belly button, you can hear it. You just put your fetoscope there and you hear, and it has been historical that placenta previas were detected that as the mother got closer to full term, the cells of the cervix start to soften and open, and there was distinct frank bleeding in the last weeks, usually starting around 35 to 37 weeks. And this has been the historical way of detecting placenta previa. And if you've got blood pouring down your legs, please go to a hospital and please use ultrasound. But it is not the rate of placenta previa, which is a low-lying or a placenta over the cervix. It's usually detected at the 20-week ultrasound, and it's detected through a transvaginal wand going up the woman's vagina. Women have never been asked what they think about that, about having this wand up their vagina. When asked, most of them really, really despise it. They find it disgusting, but they weren't asked. They were just told, this is the best thing that's going to happen, so lie down, spread your legs, and this thing is going up your vagina. But we're taught, open them up, let things go up there because you need your baby to be safe. We want to keep your baby safe. Now, where else have we heard this nonsense about safe? Yes, it's the same thing. Same poop, different pile. It's just it's the same thing. But when it's detected, I have heard from ethical radiologists who look at these ultrasounds. The ethical ones say the position of the placenta should never be discussed at the 20-week ultrasound because over 97% of them will gravitate upwards as the uterus grows, and it is not an issue. And so it creates this tremendous fear for the mother and the practitioner when 97% of the time or more, it's a complete non-issue.
Mm-hmm.
And that, and the silliness that comes out of those ultrasounds. I was heard recently of someone contacted me because her cousin, I believe, was booked for a C-section because the 20-week ultrasound said the baby was long. A long baby.
Long. and didn't think to maybe observe parents and
Could be. I did have a
whatever.
client. She had an 18-week ultrasound, and at the 18-week ultrasound, the baby was posterior, meaning the baby's back was towards the mother's back. The baby's face was pointing towards mom's belly button. And the doctor who looked at that said, okay, we're going to book your C-section because, posterior babies don't come out. And this is 18 weeks pregnant.
Oh my gosh.
She fired him.
Yeah, because good that she was aware to do that. Yeah.
Oh, very simple birth in the pool in her dining room. It was lovely.
Because at 18 weeks, baby's not going to turn or flip or move and get into proper position. And it's interesting because that's come up too is positioning. Since we're talking about that, it's like, oh, well, what about breech? Well, what about face presentation? Or what about all these things? Like, do they need to be in hospital? And no, we're finding out. But it's again the scare tactics, right? Of like, how can we find more ways to push our interventions and schedule C-sections on these women? And I do find it fascinating that. So I think just not being aware, maybe it's another marketing thing of scheduling a C-section because discomfort or because this, like, just not even any kind of medical reason behind it. And a lot are just, okay, we will do that, but not realizing how invasive it is. And I don't know if that's like the marketing. I remember going to my first C-section and waiting for baby, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like way more violent than I expected it to be. All the layers that have to be cut through. Then sometimes if your bladder or whatever's in the way, that has to come out and that has to be moved then, and put back together, all the layers stitched up. But then to get baby out, I couldn't believe how aggressive, they were on mom's abdomen. And again, I wonder if this is a marketing ploy, lack of informed information, thinking it's just easy, can get baby out of there and it's okay. But yeah, I just think about the scheduled C-sections a lot.
My experience in working with clients is sexual assault survivors don't want to be sexually assaulted again. Childhood sexual rape victims don't want to be raped again. And every image of birth is her on her back, her legs open, being pried open, somebody between her legs, fingers going up there, hands going up there, instruments going up there, many people in the room, a light shining up her vulva, and she doesn't want to get raped. So she says, give me a C-section. And I did work with one woman where she was just like, I don't want to be raped again. I was raped enough as a child. I'm not going to do that again. I don't want to be splayed open and hands up there and people watching and a room full there and lights shining up. So she asked for a C-section, and the hospital staff was like, too posh to push. Isn't that special? Because she didn't want to disclose why, and nor should she have. But it's that rampant abuse that happens to women no matter what they choose. And so she was given the spinal. She was, naked until the cloth went over her. Her arms were tied down like this. And she said at that moment when she was anesthetized, she said, I can't get up and run. And she said it was more traumatic. She said at the time, she said it was no different when she was raped. It was the same thing. But that has been, because I specialize in trauma, that has been a significant factor in why some women choose that. It's not always the reason at all, but it is a contributing factor. And it's because the industry has not learned to treat women with dignity, nor will they. That's not on the agenda.
No, just keeps getting worse. And that is a very significant, way to look at it. And then something I have not considered until hearing this, but I know that kind of like is a good segue into your Birth Trauma Ontario program that you created a long time ago, because you saw the need and what was happening. And maybe you can kind of describe your program that you created and why you did it, and for people that might need this work.
I was working in the community, and working in the community, it was women who had these really violating experiences in the technocratic medicalized birth services industry. Very violating experiences, very high rates of trauma. And I didn't have the rabbit hole of research at that point. All I knew is that these women should not be alone in their journey to recovery. As they made attempts at getting postpartum counseling, they were being treated for depression, but trauma is not depression, although depression can coexist with trauma. Medication for depression does not alleviate trauma because it's not the same thing. And what I did then is I created an organization where women wouldn't feel so alone. They could connect with each other. They could talk to each other. There were monthly meetings in person, and that was highly therapeutic. And the women said that the most important part of their recovery was being heard. Nobody gaslighting them, saying, well, at least you have a healthy baby. Nobody said that to them. They validated the experience. That was awful because everybody had the same thing. They were allowed to say whatever they wanted, and their healing journey was supported, and it was transformative. And as is my way, because I'm an academic, I started going down the rabbit hole of research on this. And as I did, I just did a one-day workshop. I thought, this is too big. So I was working for an organization at the time where they said, could you create us a mini course? Sure, I'll make you a little mini course, a 2-hour thing. And no, the research on birth-related trauma and obstetrical violence is vast. It exists. It is global. Nobody reads it. And if they do, it doesn't change anything, but the research is there. And I went down every bloomin' rabbit hole. It took me 3 years to write this course. The organization it was first offered through, it was accredited with distinction through the ANCC for 63 continuing education credit hours for nurses and midwives. It is now in the hands of Birth Trauma Ontario. Birth Trauma Ontario does not have the money for the accreditation process. So it is the same course. I've added to it. It's probably about 75 hours of continuing education now, but it does not have the ANCC accreditation. That's a very expensive process. But it took 3 years. It was very difficult. I read thousands and thousands of documents to create this course. And there are thousands of documents that highlight this as an international issue of obstetric violence. Obstetric refers to the client, not the person perpetrating the violence. It is the obstetric woman who is being violated by doctor, nurse, midwife, administrator. It really doesn't matter. Doula, it doesn't matter. It's the obstetric client, and this is a global issue. And so the course I wrote outlines what the problems are, what the effects are, and what the solutions are. So it's very solutions oriented.
Which is so needed is the solutions. And I feel like there's so much, and again, it's probably just because of the field of work I'm coming out of, what I was witness to for 12 years. And I can't even imagine the research and the stories and the things that you had to bear witness to and still do. And just even that alone, like carrying those burdens and the weight and the traumas of that. And we can get into a lot of, the negative and the what not to do. And you have a whole workshop on, how to birth in the technocratic model, or how not to, or that my husband and I took. It was an amazing day. So you guys can check out Billie's website and find out if she's doing another one, this 8-hour workshop, and it's amazing to connect with other people there. But I think it's important too, because I want to make sure that we still have some time left, but I just don't know where the conversation's going to go, on some positive things of the work that you are now doing. So this is your second year, with offering the Traditional Birth Companion program. I think it's important to talk about what that even is, what a traditional birth companion is, and what you provide, and just how birth is just so beautiful and amazing. And you said to me it'll be a joyful experience. So I think it's good to kind of talk about the positives of birth. That yes, they're in this model it can be scary, fearful, and even traumatic to the point of PTSD. But I think let's bring it back to what birth can be like and what it should be like.
I'll start by saying that the technocratic medicalized birth services industry is not broken. Not even close. It is a superbly well-oiled, highly functioning system, machine. It has improved its efficiency in the last couple of years so that induction rates are much higher. In most hospitals, C-section rates are 50% or higher. There's room for improvement. I mean, well done. Good for you getting it up to 50%. Kudos. And I think with a couple of more years and more effort, they could probably get it up to 70%. There's some good momentum there. The system is not broken. It was set up originally within the last couple of 100 years or so. It built off of the introduction of the barber surgeon who came to births, that then became the male midwife, that then became the obstetrician, the lying-in hospitals that then became routine hospitals, the lobbying industries, the ACOGs and the Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, these lobbying industries, the money that has gone into the government to favor them. The system is beautifully functioning. It was designed to control and co-opt women's physiology for power and profit. And well done. When you enter into that technocratic system as a good-hearted person, as a good-hearted midwife, nurse, tender-hearted, your doula, you're going to make a difference. You're going to humanize these services. You're going to make things woman-centered again, gentle to the babies. You are what a system science calls a disturbance. You irritate the system, and they know how to deal with it. The burnout rate for doulas is 3 years because the efforts are met with a great deal of resistance. So the doula industry itself is a perpetual 3-year-old, and the burnout rate for midwives is a little longer, but they're not able to get through it much either. And so I'm not interested in changing it. I am interested in providing an alternative to families so that if they want those technocratic services because it brings them a sense of safety and they like the religious sacraments that go along with it, enjoy. That's why it's there. But if they would like something different, then most women like having a companion with them when they have a baby. They like it. It's nice. It's nice to have somebody there who knows what they're doing, is wise, educated, trained, calm, knows when to just sit there and smile, maybe make a cup of tea, but maybe problem solve if an issue comes up. And they like that. When it has been my experience, and this is not across the board, I'm just talking about my experience, it has been my experience that women say, nobody's getting near me when I have my baby. I am going to the bathroom, I am closing the door, and I'm locking it. I am going to the woods, and I'm not telling you, and I will come back with a baby. It's because their trust has been so violated. They don't know who to trust. They don't want anyone near them. But my experience is if they find somebody to trust, they like it. And I think that learning to be a birth companion makes you just a more useful human. And I think anybody can be a more useful human. So what I'm doing is I'm just training more useful humans that families can say, I do not want to use these services. I know what they mean. It's just not aligned with what I want. And can you companion with me? Teach me how to eat. Help me manage my pregnancy concerns. Help me with things like symphysis pubis dysfunction. Do you know about that? Well, yes, we do. Yes, we do. How can we help? We may not be able to solve it, but we can outsource you to people who can solve it. And I do not, the technocratic birth services industry, the obstetrical model has determined for themselves what high risk is and what low risk is. And they allow midwives to work with low risk women. So they practice obstetrics on low risk women. But a birth companion works with whoever asks her to, so long as it's within her ability to help. And we just help. So I specialize in trauma and I specialize in high risk. The women that work with me are not the, deal little 22-year-old who's on her second baby and has a proven pelvis. They don't come to me. The women who come to me have got complexities and they need more advanced kind of help. So what I'm doing is I'm training companions to work with families in complex settings, complex situations, to be a more useful human. And it's not hard to be a more useful human. This is not, you don't have to know everything about everything. You just have to know some things about some things. It's also my perspective that the obstetrical industry should be tried for crimes against humanity for their mandatory surgery in a breech presentation due to physician incompetence. They have chosen incompetence. They have chosen this to say, ooh, yeah, breech. Yeah, we're going to do surgery. Because otherwise you don't want a dead baby, do you? And I'm thinking, learn some damn skills. I think your hairstylist, the kid who makes your sandwich at Subway should have vaginal breech birth skills. It makes them a more useful human. So the mother is in there getting a sandwich for lunch. She goes into the bathroom, her water breaks. Precipitous labor. She comes out, oh my gosh, there's a little foot coming down. The kid at the counter says, that's okay, ma'am. Jumps over the counter and says, I can help. Why not?
Yeah. I'm just imagining, I was like, no, that kid would have more skills than some of the, we're discussing paramedics that get called to these things that have no idea on positioning or what to do either.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's just knowing that, there could be issues or complications, but okay, well, what do you do and how do you problem solve? And you had a post up, I think recently about how I think both like the system, obstetrics and midwifery are just losing their skills.
Yes.
And just, they don't know how to use it. They don't know how to use, the fetal scope properly to detect where the placenta is. They don't know what to do for a shoulder dystocia or, breech or face presentation. And then they outsource and it's an emergency.
They don't know how to palpate a belly.
Yes. Yes. And I have noticed this even, in nursing, the more digitalized things become and automatic, with, okay, well, everything's hooked up to a monitor. There's your respirations, there's your heart rate. Okay. Strap on this, the blood pressure cuff. There it is. It tells you everything. You don't have to learn, the skills as much, like new nurses coming out, or yeah, it's just because it's all done for you. So we're losing a lot of important hands-on assessment skills that are needed. And that's something you bring back in your traditional birth companion courses. Okay, well, we're not going to be using these things unless there is, of course, an issue where it's needed. But otherwise, how can we use our skills? How can
Yes,
we?
yes.
Yes.
And what most women don't realize, that the way legislation is written in most parts of the world is when she becomes pregnant, her vagina becomes property of the medical industry.
Yes.
That nobody without a medical license is allowed to penetrate her vagina except them. Now, they're usually quite accommodating for partners because partners are most often male and it's a very misogynistic industry. But as someone like me, it's like, oh, you cannot put your fingers in her vagina. Like, well, I'm happy with that. I've got my own. I don't need to be up with somebody else's. So you have to learn a new skill set. You know, how dilated is a woman? I'd rather look at her face. Her face tells me more than probably sticking my fingers up. That's a nonsensical ritual. So yes, it requires us to learn new human-based skills, and I love it. It's so nice to look at a woman's face and say, "Oh, it's maybe time to put the kettle on. We're gonna have a baby soon." And the kettle is for tea, for nothing else.
Yes, you can have that warm cup after baby's born, you always say. But that's it's so simple, right? You look at what's the tone of the voice, what is the positioning, what is her facial expressions, what is the behaviors, anything, changed. And one of the the classics that you always say is like, has she said fuck yet? Like, and it's like, because that's when baby's coming. It's like
Yep.
yeah. And I was thinking of I know we're getting close, but thinking of being a useful human. I used to live in Tofino for a bit, like pre kids and a whole other lifetime ago. And went back out to visit in 2019. There was a friend there who was expecting, and she was telling me that because the hospital in Tofino is so small, there's no obstetrics, there's no OBs because there just wasn't enough births, throughout the year that would allot for the funding or to have OBs there. Because there's no OBs there working in the hospital, no midwives are allowed to work in Tofino. So if you are expecting in that small little village, you have to go out to the nearest town, the hospital, which is Port Alberni, which is 4 hours or more away, I believe, and a hotel room and wait. Some had family members where they could stay with, or friends, but there was many. It's a lot of like tourists and people traveling from all over that stay there for transient work, and they would stay in a hotel and wait.
Oh, goodness gracious, God forbid she have that baby at home with her neighbors. So
Yes.
prior to there was a remarkable document created, I believe it was 1985 or 87. It was the report to the Ontario government on the Task Force Midwifery, how to integrate midwifery in the Health Disciplines Act. And there was a little history of how birth unfolded in Canada prior to Confederation. The good old boys from the brand new fledgling all-male Canadian Medical Association went to the all-male parliamentarians of Upper Canada at the Boulevard Club. And as they were swirling their brandy and smoking their cigars, the all-male Medical Association wanted to make midwifery illegal. And the parliamentarians thought, smashing good idea. Because if a physician, they knew that if they were at a birth, they got a customer for life. And they weren't getting customers because Canadians prior to Confederation, the women took care of their families. They knew herbs. They knew how to stitch someone up with their sewing kit. There were no antibiotics, so they used herbs for infections and treating wounds, and babies were just born at home. They managed to make it illegal, and as each province joined Confederation, midwifery was added onto the books that it was illegal. Now, the physicians had no idea of how to be at a birth. So at McGill University in 1885, the all-male physicians were scratching their heads going, so which end does the kid come out? And they brought in the now illegal midwives to teach them what to do. which, kind of sit on your hands. But what continued is that the doctor was expensive. So they just called the neighbor, and the neighbor came over. And the neighbor who had had 4 or 5 kids, she was the local expert. And then she came over and she stayed. And the men left and helped take care of the kids and made a meal. Baby came out and she stayed to help. And she probably did, 5, 6 births. She retired. The next neighbor took up, and that was her job. The outcomes of these neighborly births. Now, the neighbors knew nothing about neonatal resuscitation, hemorrhage, breech, shoulder dystocia, none of that stuff. The outcomes were between 4 and 10 times better than anything seen in a Canadian hospital. But they pushed the narrative that the hospital was saving women, although it was, in fact, killing them. But that was the narrative. You must go because you'll be very, very safe. And family physicians continued to attend births in Canada up until 1987, when stroppy women like myself were like, yeah, I'll go to your birth. Sure, let's have a baby. Let's get some champagne. Let's cook something and we'll have a baby. Yeah. The rocking chair, nursing baby was there, and the babies came out and everything was grand. And the doctors who still attended births, they liked it. It was kind of nice. There was a cup of tea, glass of champagne, and they hung out. It was very nice. But because we stroppy cows were thinking we could do this again, it started with Ontario. The Ontario Medical Association forbade their doctors from attending home births, that if they did that anymore, they would lose their hospital privileges. So the grand doctors that we used to call for, hey, this one's looking a little dodgy. What do you think? You want to come over? And then he'd come over and maybe give a few words of input. And then he wasn't allowed to do that anymore. He was going to lose his license. And so the newer doctors who cannot attend home births, or they will lose their license, think the reason they don't do it is because, somebody's going to die. The mother's going to die. The baby's going to die. I won't do that. I'm not responsible for somebody dying. You come to a hospital. And if a woman goes to her family doctor, it's very common. It may not happen so much anymore, but it's very common. She'll say, I want to have a home birth. And they'll say, you can have a midwife, but don't have a home birth. Be in a hospital. Be in a hospital. That's just the conditioning and the fear. But that's the history of birth, is that women just showed up and the babies came out and all was well.
Mm-hmm. And just wise women helping women and sharing that knowledge and community and the way it should have been. It makes me think of a book, if listeners, there's so many books out there, but The Red Tent. Every time I think of, just the history of midwives and how women used to come together and help and just how skilled and knowledgeable they were, it always makes me think of the Red Tent. And another book that goes into the history, her story of all of this, for those that are interested. Billie had introduced me to Rachel Reed, and it's the Reclaiming the Rite of Passage to Childbirth.
Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage.
Yes, thank you.
Outstanding book. It is required reading for my students.
Yes, and it is amazing. I have been consumed this past year with reading all things birth, and that is probably one of my favorites, with how she describes the history, the physiological birth process, because you don't know that. Like, if you want to know the physiological birth process, don't go to a nurse and don't go to a doctor, as they don't know anything.
They have no training in physiological birth, and they've never seen it.
They've never seen it.
Never seen it. Now, yes, some people say there's a natural birth in a hospital. No, that's just non-medicated. It is not.
Yeah, that just means no epidural and came out vaginally. That's not a physiological birth.
These physicians have had over 400 years to get women off their backs. They still haven't figured out how to catch a baby with a woman off her back.
No, because it's easier. Well, just like everything else, it's convenient for them because they get to view everything. They get that bright light. They get to sit on their stool and sit there and just wait and be comfortable. Yes.
Yeah, it's gross.
Yeah.
Yeah. I tend to say that if you don't know how to facilitate an upright birth, if you don't know how to prevent preeclampsia, if you don't know how to heal cholestasis, if you don't know how to resolve a shoulder dystocia without hurting the baby, you're just not ready. You're just not ready.
And you're not a useful human being.
No.
For bringing it back. But these are all things that Billie covers in her course to become a traditional birth companion. I believe you probably have other kind of workshops that you offer, but your big one is to become a birth companion. That is, working
trauma informed.
Oh, yes, thank you. And the trauma informed. Yes. And that is also included and mandatory in the traditional birth companion course. So,
but it can be taken separately. It's available to everyone.
Yeah.
So that course has been taken by students on 4 continents so far. It has been taken by healthcare professionals, but it's also been taken by grandfathers. A grandfather took that because he wanted to know more about supporting his daughters. Human resources finds it incredibly useful. It was taken by a team of human resources in the US because they said that the maternity leave for their employees was so brief that they came back to work too soon, and they came back with PTSD and the 1,000-yard stare, and they had no idea how to help them, and they weren't able to work effectively. So they took the course to help with their employees. So it's useful for pretty much everybody.
Yes. And so those are ways that people want to connect with you. I'll let you kind of wrap up how all the ways people can connect with you, work with you, or learn from you.
Come and join the Harrigan Hive, harriganhive.com. It's a network. It's a free network where we talk about birth outside the system. We do not promote the medical model there. If you want the medical model, it's everywhere. If you need to find a medical practitioner, just call up a local clinic. If you need a hospital, they're going to serve you. This is for talking about birth outside the system, trauma-informed care, and we try to connect families with a traditional birth companion if available. And it's a place for unlearning and relearning. And then you can find me at my website, billieharrigan.com. I offer consultations. I'm currently on leave from birth services due to bereavement, so we'll see when that returns. And birthtraumaontario.ca. And that teaches the causes, consequences, and cures for birth-related trauma and obstetrical violence.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much. I wasn't sure. There's so many different areas of where this conversation could go, but I think it always is perfect the way it happens. And I know hopefully more people will reach out and join the Harrigan Hive and start having these conversations and start normalizing more and more and becoming useful human beings, wise women, back helping women again, and neighbors, and supporting and getting back to our kind of foundational roots as women, how we as the healers, the herbs, the nurturers, like all these gifts that have been kind of taken from us. So I'm excited to kind of reclaim this in my own journey coming up, and then help others do the same. And I'm gonna save your calendars, everyone, or put a marker on there, because we're hoping to host a conference in London. I believe the beginning of June, possibly June 9th. We'll see, all things birth. And so we've asked Billie to be kind of the keynote speaker there. So it's still lots of planning still in the works, but yes. So if you're interested in, in this, so save the date is what I meant to say. So that's what we're looking at. But thank you so much, Billie. Always a pleasure. And it's amazing how just always learn something new every time. In every conversation, there's always like a new tidbit that.
Thank you for having me. This was a pleasure.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, have a wonderful night, everyone. And we'll see you next Wednesday, 7 p.m. for Taking Back Birth.